In the previous parts of Module 5, we have elaborated on concepts of power and politics. In this part, we will elaborate on specific tools and frameworks in order to apply those political tactics. However, we will do this considering ethical issues, since political behavior brings ethical issues. Before elaborating on how to apply political behavior considering ethical aspects, it is necessary to remind us why does political behavior occurs. As we know, political behavior is triggered not only by personal ambition, but also by organizational structures that create roles and departments and put us in competition regarding access to information and to resources. Another trigger of political behavior is organizational change, because there is always a struggle to preserve the status quo. We know that change creates uncertainty and ambiguity, and people is concerned about their jobs and workloads. So there are many reasons because for political behavior, and these reasons are highlighted during the introduction of a project, because everything will change in a project. Before elaborating on how to apply political behavior considering ethical aspects, it is necessary to remind us why does political behavior occurs. As we know, political behavior is triggered not only by personal ambition, but also by organizational structures that create roles and departments and put us in competition regarding access to information and to resources. Another trigger of political behavior is organizational change, because there is always a struggle to preserve the status quo. We know that change creates uncertainty and ambiguity, and people is concerned about their jobs and workloads. So there are many reasons because for political behavior, and these reasons are highlighted during the introduction of a project, because everything will change in a project. This slide details why does political behavior occurs. Please read it on your own time. The application of power and politics concepts, it's done in this unit in two parts. First, we will see the mapping of the political terrain, and second, we will see whether the political actions that the project managers performs are ethical. We will start with the mapping of the political terrain. The mapping of the political terrain is related to the warrants, that is, if whether the project manager is doing the right thing, to the accounts the project managers can build in order to provide a strong arguments to justify his or her actions, and related to also to the reputation that the project manager gets at the end of the project. Before explaining each one, I need to mention that warrants, accounts, and reputations are in turn related to three central aspects that are related to the context of the organization, to the political actions performed by the project managers, and the political skills of the project manager. So context of the organizations include organizational features and stakeholders. Organizational features we know that affects what or how the project managers implement the project, because it's related to the lines of authority, availability of resources, and the prevailing organizational culture in the project. All those aspects shape the implementation of the project. Next, the stakeholders. Stakeholders we know that are the ones that may either support the project or may constrain the achievement of the goals of the project. So it is necessary, of course, to develop a stakeholder analysis in order to implement the project, in order to identify the key stakeholders, clarify their needs, their interests, and to evaluate whether they may support or constrain the project. Next, we have the project manager that is seen as a political entrepreneur. That is the person who needs to use specific power bases in order to go ahead with the project. And this, of course, involves the individual personality of the project manager, her skills and will. It also involves the agenda of the project manager that is attempting to achieve. Usually, project manager's agenda is a combination of personal wishes, such as job satisfaction and achievement, and organizational goals, that is, achieve some of the goals of the project, for sure. Now, next we have the political actions or ongoing actions that the project managers need to develop in order to achieve and to support the development of the project. So project managers apply political tactics in order to get support, to form alliances, to block resistance, or to build image, or using scapegoating or rule manipulation or networking, all those aspects that we have already discussed in the previous part. And when we see in together these three aspects, they will help us to explain how warrants, accounts, and reputation will help to map the political terrain during the implementation of projects. Mapping the political terrain involves first knowing whether or not the project managers have warrants in order to justify the action that he or she will take to achieve the goals of the project. In few words, the project manager needs to ask himself or herself, I am doing the right thing here? That is the key point. So warrants refer to the degree of confidence the project manager has to offer convincing explanations about her actions, her future actions that will be taken in order to achieve the goals of the project. Of course, warrants, as I have already mentioned, depend on the context of the organization, availability of resources, project goals, personal goals, and the goals of other people who may seek to block part or the whole project. There are formal warrants that are written in emails and in policies, but also there are informal personal tacit warrants that are informal, that they are not written anywhere, but they are as important as the formal warrants. Informal warrants are the warrants that are, let's say, under the table, that some key people will provide to you in order for you to have reassurance that you can go ahead with your project. Accounts are the arguments the project manager uses to justify his or her actions during the project. And a good argument, for example, is to say, I did this or this other action because this was good for the project. This supported the project or the organizations. So accounts are the public face of warrants. We need to remember that projects need to be seen or perceived as a success. This is as important as the project success itself. I'm saying this because sometimes the project can be a success, but it can be perceived or seen by some stakeholders as a failure. And that is a significant issue. So the role of the project managers is to develop a strong argument to show to everybody and to tell especially to everybody how and why the project is a success. Reputation is one of the outcomes of the project, and reputation of the project manager involves choosing behaviors that are sustainable over time. That is why reputation is important. Reputation will frame us to do the right thing, and this is related to ethical aspects, of course. A positive reputation, for sure, will facilitate access to resources or information in our next project. A negative reputation, of course, will constrain access to those resources or to future projects or to relevant positions in the next project that we are working on. Here we have a definition of reputation as a socially defined asset that is dependent on the behavior of the project manager and on the interpretation of other people. So project managers need to consider their reputation when they are developing the project, because reputation is the only thing that project managers can walk away with after the project ends. The physical project, the product of the project, will remains in the organization wherever it is. And the project manager, the only thing that can take away from the project is his or her reputation. That is why reputation is a crucial aspect when we need to think regarding how do we proceed when we are applying political behavior in projects. As I have mentioned before, there are two things that we need to do when we are using the political tactics that we have mentioned before. The first thing that we need to do is to map the political terrain. And the second thing that we will do is to see whether or not those political actions are ethically correct. Please, as a way of a break, watch the Dilbert video on ethics. One approach to deal with ethical issues linked to political behavior is to use the work of Velázquez. Velázquez helps to differentiate dirty politics from responsible political action. This approach is based on the concept of utilitarianism, theory of rights, and theory of justice. We will combine these three concepts in order to judge political behavior. Here on the slide, you can see utilitarian theory. Utilitarian theory judges behavior in terms of a balance sheet of benefits and damage to the populations involved. Political behavior is acceptable if it passes the test of meeting the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The problem is that calculating satisfaction and other potential consequences of the political actions can be problematic. The theory of rights judges political behavior as the extent to which fundamental individuals' rights are respected. For example, the right to privacy or the right to free speech. In this case, judging the individual rights is easy because it is not difficult to establish whether a specific individual right in a specific situation has been violated or not. Theory of justice judges political behavior based on the extent to which the benefits and costs of the consequences of the political actions are fairly, equitably distributed. That is, individuals in similar situations should be treated equally. Rules should be applied consistently to everyone, and individuals should not be held responsible for matters that are beyond their control. Like in the case of utilitarianism, calculating these outcomes, it may be problematic. The whole argument is represented in this figure. Following this framework, we can determine whether a political act can be judged ethical or not. The first thing that we can do, of course, is to get information regarding the political act. Next, we need to apply the ethical criteria that I have already mentioned. We need to apply the utilitarianism, theory of rights, and theory of justice. If the answer to these three, three questions is positive, then the political act is ethical. But if the answer to any of them is negative, we need to go to another step, and we need to check if in that situation there are overwhelming factors or double effects or incapacitating factors. Overwhelming factors refers to any aspect of the context of the project that would justify leaving aside one or all three ethical criteria. These criteria may be in conflict. For example, in the case of utilitarianism, achieving the greatest good to the greatest number of people may violate individuals' rights. Just a quick example, the right to free speech, for example, may not be applied when such a freedom would lead to a dissemination of information that may damage other members of the organization. Also, for example, when the case of double effects. Double effects means that all acts usually have both positive and negative effects. Negative outcomes become acceptable if the dominant purpose is to achieve a positive outcome and if the positive outcome overweights the negative outcomes. So we need to always to apply these ethical concepts in context. And finally, incapacitating factors is the possibility that the decision maker may be unable to apply these ethical criteria. Why? Because individuals may be constrained by the views or actions of other colleagues or bosses. Managers can also be pressured into behaviors that would not choose to do it independently. One more time. So the relevance of these ethical criteria is need to be understood in a specific context. The framework presented is not or does not represent a rigid decision structure. It means that there are different escape routes which give the project manager license to apply a reasonable judgment in a specific context. In this slide, we have additional information that explain this idea of incapacitating factors that justify not using or putting lesser weight to some of the specific ethical criteria that we have mentioned. So the question is, how do we apply this framework in a real world situation? What we need to do is to combine the ethic test framework with the warrants, account, and reputation framework in order to be able to deal with a complex political situation. Nothing better than a good real world example in order to understand how to apply these concepts. Please read the incident report number 1, what the chief executive wants, and try to answer these 4 questions on the slide in order to see if the acts were ethically right or ethically wrong. During our workshops and collaborations, we will discuss this specific case. The following set of slides provides advice on how to apply power and politics tactics in order to advance the implementation of your projects. Those slides are self-explanatory. Please, you need to read it on your own time. But remember, they are not a step-by-step recipe. All advice provided needs to be considered in relation to the specific context of your project and your position in the project. If you have any questions, of course, during the workshops and the collaborations, we can discuss any of those aspects. Finally, please don't forget and read the recommended and prescribed readings, and that they will help to you to better understand these power and politics aspects that happens in complex projects.